Brother Russ.
Y'all, we have a special, so by the way, that singing sounded great. We have a special speaker today. Now, many of you know Wille Chriesman. Chriesman or Chriesman?
Either way.
All right. Chriesman, many of you know Willie, but you don't know about Willie. All right. The man's father was a preacher, Church of Christ preacher in Bessemer. Okay. And Willie has been in news management, news programming in Boston, in Chicago, in Denver, in Detroit, and here at Channel 13. Okay. Right now, he is a consultant doing freelance production. Please help me welcome Mr. News, Wille Chriesman.
Thank you, Russ. It is ironic that a media person is having trouble with media, and that's why I was late coming down here. So I apologize for that and hope you will forgive me. And Russ asked if it's Chriesman or Chriesman, which always has been one of the great debates in my family. My mother would say Chriesman, my father would say Chriesman. I figured he had it longer, so I gave it to him. So that's why we go with Chriesman generally. As Russ mentioned, and I guess I should talk about what we're going to talk about today. Russ asked me some time ago if I'd be willing to do an encouraging words speech to you good people. And there was something that's been on my heart for a while, so I thought it was a great opportunity to try to address that. And what I thought I'd talk to you about today is the issue I call the color of faith, which deals with the challenges of church diversity. As Russ mentioned, I grew up in the Church of Christ in Bessemer. My father was a minister there. But there were two Churches of Christ in Bessemer when I was growing up. There was one on 24th Street, which was next to the U.S. Pipe and Foundry Company, which we affectionately call Pipe Shop. And there was another one that was on 5th Avenue North near downtown Birmingham, which was ministered at the time by Brother A.C. Moore. We visited each other every now and then, but we were never united. And it always struck me as strange that here we were, two Churches of Christ in the same town, barely having anything to do with each other. So it led me to be curious about the whole issue of diversity. And again, as reflected from Russ's comments, I have experienced churches all over the country and still have never found what I thought to be truly a diverse environment. And it struck me as wondering why. So James, this is my cue for my first video. So I want to set up this discussion by looking at a video we found online, and I wanted to share it with you. It was a promotional trailer for a book that was out a few years ago, but I thought it addressed some of the issues we want to talk about today. So, James, if you could hit it. So, more than 50 years after Dr. King made this statement about Sunday morning being the most segregated hour of the week, things haven't changed considerably. People actually do statistics on these things, and I will not try to bore you with many of them, but I did think it gave some perspective. That one study says that 80%, 4 out of 10 churches of America have one ethnic group or one racial group making up more than 80% of its congregants. 4 out of 5 churches have congregations that are made up of one single ethnicity or racial group as 80% of its membership, a category that we at this church fall into as well. Next slide, please. And so the question is, how important is diversity, and does it make a difference? And if you ask people whether diversity makes a difference, many of them say, yeah, I think it's important that different races work together and they not be segregated. Next one, please, James. But then when it comes to whether the church you live in, the church you worship with, is doing a good job, that opinion changes a little bit. So that 2/3 of the people say that our church is doing enough to achieve diversity in their ranks. And if you look at that broken down by what are categorized as evangelical churches, that number goes up to 71% of them saying that we think we're doing okay on this subject. Next. But if you look at it from the other perspective, the people of color, what do they think about this? Roughly half of them think that there needs to be more done to make their church more diverse, less segregated. About 51% of African Americans say that, less than nearly half of Hispanics say that. So much of this depends on where you are and what your perspective is. It's kind of like Congress. We think Congress is horrible on the whole, but our guy is good. Well, we think that diversity is a good thing, but our church isn't doing so bad at it. So the question becomes, next please, why this is the case. Why do we have these situations so long after that period where it was expected to be that way? And I think it comes down to a number of different things. I think it comes down to tradition. It's just the way we've done things. There's no malice involved. It's just that's how we do things. I think it also comes down to issues like different worship styles and comfort with those worship styles. That we feel that sometimes we may not fit into the worship style of another congregation that may be preaching the same gospel we're preaching and may be saying the same things we're saying, but they feel that maybe it's just not for me, and it's not what I want to do. So I think that those are some of the issues we want to face as we go forward on this. There are a couple of things I want to say about this discussion too. To me, this is a conversation. I am not here to lecture. I am not here to impose guilt or change anything. I think it's worth talking about. And I think also that it's important that we kind of understand that I see this as a safe zone. That this is not a situation where there's guilt or recrimination, because I think a lot of times when we have these discussions, which is often called the third rail of politics, these discussions about race and ethnicity and diversity, sometimes there's this feeling that we can't say what we want to say, afraid of being politically incorrect or hurting somebody's feelings. But I think that if we don't have those discussions at all, we'll never get to the point where we're comfortable with having this. So I want you all to feel that this is a discussion made not out of any feeling that we're doing anything wrong. It's out of love and for a desire to see if we can broaden our horizons a bit. So, if we look at the issue of diversity in churches and what's important and what's not important, I think that we also have to realize that there's an issue of making it a priority, whether it's important. Do we think it's important? Does it have to be important? And if it is important, what do we do about it? So if we can move to the next slide, please. I want to make clear also that I think that there is one reason that is not a reason why this church may not be more diverse as many churches are. I do not think it is because we don't care about people. I have experienced many churches across the country, and I have found this to be one of the most open, most loving, most welcoming congregations I have ever experienced, which is why I've been here for almost 18 years now. So there's a reason for that. And it's not that we don't care about people of color, because clearly we do. Everything from the backpack blowout to sending missionaries all over the world to reach the lives of people of color. We care about people, so it's not an issue of us not caring. But what is it? And why should we even care? And I think that there are a number of different reasons why that comes into play. I think that, I get old, so that's why I have to come closer to the screen to make sure I've got everything right. We should, because it's about people and about building those connections. And I think ultimately, it's about doing what we should be doing as people of God and children of God. Brett and Justin, for the past few weeks, have been preaching this wonderful series of messages on the greatest commandment, to love God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength. But then we stopped there, which is fine, because the subject was all, and that was all we had to say about all. But the second part of that commandment was an important one too, which is to love your brother as yourself. And that comes down to the crux. Are we doing that in the way we conduct ourselves when it comes to these issues? I wanted to bring in a couple of other voices on this discussion, if I could, and have them weigh in on what this issue is and whether it's important. And one of them is, yes, my good friend, Brother Ronnie Jackson, with whom I've tried to make trouble many times over the past few years. And as you know, with Ronnie, it's very easy. Ronnie, you're a lifelong member of the Church of Christ in this area. Why do you think it has been less diverse over the years than it possibly could be?
Well, I believe probably the biggest thing is, one, we were brought up in a segregated society where white people did this, black people did this, people of color, and we never were encouraged to be together except when we were forced into a relationship, like at schools, because I was in the 11th grade when the first people of color started coming to Minor High School, and they weren't accepted real well. I became friends with a couple of the guys. There was only like 5 in the whole school.
Bring the mic up close.
There was only like 5 in the whole school, and we, they were isolated and they were segregated against, and they were not treated in the best of ways. Then I went to Clanton, and there was even only like 2 of color there, and they were actually chased off the campus and hid in a cornfield across the street, and that kind of thing. And you got to, and then I got to realizing, this thing is, if we're all people of God and we all are to love one another as we love ourselves, why do we quit when we get to the matter of a person of color? And it got harder and harder. So I found myself reaching out beyond and making friends and trying to find out why us as white people sometimes didn't do a good enough job of reaching out. And I felt like a lot of times, one, we didn't know how to approach a person. We didn't know if we were going to say something that may be taken wrong. And so we got to worrying about it. We didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings by anything we said. And I think that even exists today. Like, I catch myself even today when I speak to one of my employees who's black, I make sure I never use the word boy when I talk to a young guy, because the ethnic race, they were brought up as slaves in their ancestry. They were called boys. And, I may not have any malice in my heart whatsoever by saying that, or even using the N-word. We didn't really realize the stigma that it was and the hurt that it was when we were young. But now we become, like when I talk to a younger black guy, I would say the word man, because he relates to that word and it's not offensive to him. It doesn't seem to affect him anyway. And so I've started trying, I'd start, and then my dad passed away and my mom passed away, and I had their house for sale out in Adamsville, and the area was predominantly black. And so I had made friends with a real estate agent, works for Realty South. And I got her to list the house in that area because she was familiar with that and knew the market, and she was African American. And it just so happens that she's a member at Woodland Park. That's the Church of Christ right over here.
4 miles, I think.
4 miles, 3.5 miles that we don't even hardly know is there. And I asked her, I said, why don't you come to Homewood sometime? She said, why don't you come to Woodland Park? Uh-oh. I had no problem her coming over here. I didn't know if I'd been accepted at Woodland Park like I thought I would accept her here. So here we are. We're in this paradox. We are trying to love one another, but yet we've drawn a boundary here in a 4-mile stretch with our brothers and sisters who just happen to be a different color. Now, why? I felt like we don't have maybe if we had a black minister staff, somebody who could help us as whites to know how to effectively go into the black community to get them here, or to mingle, at least reach out. And that's the thing that Willie and I have
Conspired over from time to time.
conspired over ways to plot to make something happen to get the brotherhood closer.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your thought. I've also bothered Brett about this subject from time to time, and he has indulged me with these flights of fancies from time to time. But I think Brett brings another perspective to the discussion as well that I wanted to bring in on this part too. Brett, if you could stand for just a second. You told me you grew up in a more diverse church environment. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I want to say thanks to Willie for having this conversation. I think it's an important one. And I appreciate you allowing this space to be a safe zone, and you saying that from the get-go. Willie's kind of been a guy that I've had to go to and say, Willie, I've got questions, but I don't know how to ask those questions. And I've got feelings, but I don't know how to articulate those feelings. And Willie's been gracious enough to indulge me in that. And so we've had some really good lunches over the past year or two. But I grew up, most of you know, in Nashville, and our church, the Rural Hill Church of Christ, which is not aptly named because now it's urban and in a valley, but it's still called Rural Hill. But the church was in the USA Today about 2 years ago. And the reason they were in the USA Today is because of their diversity. The church is about 40% white, 40% African American, 10 to 12% Latino, 2 to 3% Laotian, and a couple other ethnicities mixed in there. And Willie and I were talking about that, and I told Willie, I said, I can't point to just one thing to say why it is like that. Because growing up, I grew up there my whole life, and it wasn't until I was about 15, 16, 17-year-old that dynamic started occurring. So it's been impressed upon me. I've continued to, as I read God's Word, as I study, the greatest command, it's been impressed upon me that it's an important conversation for us to have, to ask the question, why does our church not look like the community in which we serve? I think that's a fair question. I think it's a fair question. So I appreciate you asking that. But that's a little bit about my background.
Here's a tough question because it's a safe zone, so we can ask these questions. Do you think that Homewood has done enough to become a more diverse church family?
Yeah, I think you have to define enough. I don't think we can. I think the other side of that question is have we done enough to love our neighbor as ourselves? And if you can say yes to that, then I want to talk to you. If you say no, I haven't done enough to love my neighbor as myself, I think we need to explore what that conversation looks like and continue to have that conversation.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Will. There are a lot of layers to unpack with this discussion, but part of it is the desire to understand people and to get to know them better, because that is the first step, I would argue, toward making this a more diverse community. I think too many of us on both sides see people and make snap judgments about them, make conclusions about them. Even if they haven't done anything to us particularly, we just automatically come up with the old stereotypes. But there was one case that struck me earlier this year. Next slide, please. You all know the case of Mike Gelati. He was the veteran and father and husband who was shot down dead outside his home while he was going to the gym one morning earlier this year in January. Subsequent to that, arrests were made of young African-American men who were involved in that. I suspect that if anybody had a reason to hate black people as a result of that event, it would be Mike Gelati's wife. So the next video that I want to play for you, I think, addresses that issue. Please.
While we may be two very different colors, we were all adopted by the same father. He is my brother, and I am his sister. From the words of Martin Luther King Jr., we cannot walk alone.
Hoover police say 16-year-old Charleston Everett Wells of Bessemer is charged with murder in connection of the shooting death of Mike Gelati. Now, investigators say they do expect to make more arrests. Heather Gelati says she's sharing her message not only as a way to help herself heal, but also to help heal the community. Live in Birmingham, Mike McClanahan, WIAT 42 News. Coverage you can count on.
The thing that struck me about that was her compassion. She could very well be excused for having hatred in her heart for the people who did that to her husband, who are accused of doing to her husband. I would hate black people if they did that to me. So I completely understand where she's coming from, but the amount of love and the fact that she says these are her brothers, she is their sister, despite what happened to her. It struck me if she can overcome that barrier, we can overcome a much lower barrier than that. So, when the question comes to what is the color of faith, faith has no color. It is what we make of it. It is us being Christians and exploring the love that that means for us. It's encouraging words. So I would encourage us to think about whether this is something we want to make more of a priority. I would encourage us to figure out ways to address that issue. Because I don't have any magic answers to this. I don't know if anybody does. But if we care about this subject, and if we think it's important, I think that God gives us the will and the ability to make something really special happen. Because ultimately, at the end, it is not about whether we are a white church or whether we are a black church or even if we are a mixed church. It is that we're God's church. So thank you so much for your time.